Good morning to all. Welcome to this video on research process. Research is a process of collecting, analyzing and interpreting information to answer questions. Research is a systematic inquiry that uses disciplined methods to answer questions or solve problems. Research process are series of actions undertaken to carry out research. Here, the researcher moves from the beginning point of a study, that is, the posing of a question, to the end point, the obtaining of an answer, in a logical sequence of predetermined steps. What is logical sequence? That is, series of steps for conducting scientific research, one after the another in a particular order. In some studies, these steps may overlap, whereas in other, certain steps are not needed. For example, in an experimental study, some steps discussed in this research process may not be needed. Anyway, there is general flow of activities. Major steps in a quantitative study. Before going to that, there are different phases in a quantitative study. There are 5 main phases in quantitative study. They are phase 1, conceptual phase, phase 2, design and planning phase, phase 3, empirical phase, phase 4, analytical phase, phase 5, dissemination phase. In each of these phases, different steps are included. So phase 1, conceptual phase, the various steps are formulating and delimiting the problem, reviewing the related literature, undertaking clinical fieldwork, defining the framework, and developing conceptual definitions, formulating hypotheses. I will deal with each phase and steps under each phase. Phase 1, the conceptual phase. Concepts. Concepts are abstract ideas or phenomena that are being studied. Abstract ideas. It is very general. Variables are characteristics of the concept. For example, if a concept is educational achievement, it's a very broad concept, very abstract one. In order to measure the educational achievement, we have to make it very specific. So the variable can be performance at school. So it is specific and measurable. So this performance at school can be measured by assessing examination grades, participation of the student in various activities in school, and so on. So thus, an abstract concept has to be made more specific. That is formulating and delimiting the problem. Researchers generate concepts by generalizing from particular facts. Concepts are based on experiences, literature review, reviewing ideas with colleagues and experts. So in the conceptual phase, the first and the important step is formulating and delimiting the problem. Formulating research problem is very important step. Good research depends to a great degree on good research problem or research question. Developing a significant, interesting research problem is very important. Problem clearly stated is problem half solved. If the researcher has good idea regarding the problem, clarity with regard to the problem, then the research process will be easy. The formulation of objectives, if hypotheses are needed, the formulation of hypotheses, all depends upon a clearly stated problem. Researcher needs to refine the problem and clearly state what is intended to be explored on the topic. Then, after formulating the problem, delimiting the problem, again, the researcher has to work in this problem so that good clarity is achieved with regard to the problem, and delimit the problem. That is, decide what to include and what to exclude in the study. Narrowing the topic to make it more manageable and relevant. Then comes the reviewing the related literature. This is the second step, reviewing the related literature. It is a detailed review of existing literature related to the topic of study. Reviewing the related literature gives an overview of current knowledge, helps to identify relevant theories, methods, and gaps in the existing research. A thorough literature review and familiarization with previous studies identifies the gap between what is known and not known about an area of inquiry. This helps in identification of a good research problem, development of the problem, refinement of this problem, research question, and formulation of hypothesis. So it helps to identify what is already known about the particular problem and what more to be known. Then the third step is undertaking clinical fieldwork. Researchers benefit from spending time in clinical settings, discussing the topic with experts, observing current practices. So experience in the area or the setting where the researcher is going to do the research helps in refining the research problem and narrowing the topic. Clinical fieldwork expands the researcher's clinical and conceptual knowledge, enhances skill in developing methodological tools for strengthening the study. Also, it will help the researcher to have awareness regarding what all variables are to be controlled. That is, researcher is not interested in certain variables, extraneous variables, and that how it can be controlled, or what all variables have to be controlled. Step 4, that is defining the framework and developing conceptual definitions. Research is performed either within the context of a theoretical framework, where previous theory is used as a basis for generating predictions, or the concepts under study are explained. So, if the researcher work is based on certain theory or certain conceptual framework, the researcher can use it as a base for explaining the concepts under study. Here comes the importance of conceptual and operational definitions. So the concept, the variable, to make it very clear, very specific, and explanation of these concepts and variables are needed. Process of turning abstract concepts into measurable variables is called operationalization. So operational definition has to be given. What is this variable in this particular research? That has to be defined. Then formulating hypothesis. Hypothesis, we know, are predictions of expected outcomes. Hypothesis states the relationships researchers expect to find as a result of the study. Detailed explanation regarding hypothesis is given in 2 videos which I have dealt with. So this is the phase 1, conceptual phase, in which formulating and delimiting the problem, reviewing the related literature, undertaking clinical fieldwork, defining the framework and developing conceptual definitions and formulating hypotheses. Then comes phase 2. Phase 2 is design and planning phase. In this phase, researchers make decision about methods and procedures to be followed or to be used to address the research question and plan for the actual collection of data. The different steps coming under design and planning phase are selecting a research design, developing protocols for the intervention, identify the population to be studied, designing the sampling plan, specifying methods to measure the research variables, developing methods for safeguarding human or animal rights, finalizing and reviewing the research plan. I will discuss this one by one. First one under design and planning phase is selecting a research design. We know research design is the overall plan for obtaining answers to the question being studied. Researchers specify which specific design will be adopted. So researcher has to decide in order to get the answer to the question posed, not to get the solution for the problem arised, which design has to be followed. Like experimental, non-experimental design, whether it is a descriptive survey one, what controls will be used to minimize bias. All these enhance the interpretability of the results. So it is a plan for data collection, measurement, and analysis. Then next step is developing protocols for the intervention. If the research involves intervention, as in experimental study, researcher needs to develop intervention protocol for the study. So this may not be applicable in all cases if it depends upon the type of the study. Then identify the population to be studied. You know, population is the entire aggregate of cases that meets a specified or designed set of criteria. Population can be anything that is subjected to study. Researcher decides what characteristics participants should possess, to whom the study results can be generalized. So the population, the problem investigating, in which population, based on that the population has to be selected and sample has to be drawn. Then designing the sampling plan. Sampling helps the researcher to generalize the findings of the study to the whole population from which the sample is drawn. So the sample must be true representative of the population. It must be larger enough to get adequate information. Only then the results can be applied to the population or the universe. Another name for population is universe, with a reasonable level of confidence. So the sampling plan, selecting the sampling plan is very important. Then comes specifying methods to measure the research variables. Specifying methods to measure the research variables. So in order to measure the research variable, various data collection techniques has to be used. Where variety of data collection approaches are there. Researchers develop methods to observe or measure the research variables as accurately as possible. Data collection methods depends on the study, can be self-reports. So it can be questionnaires, interview schedules, observation method, biophysiological measures, biological measures as well as physiological measures or both can be used. The next step is developing methods for safeguarding human-animal rights. Here, ethical principles are to be followed in research. The major ethical principles are beneficence, respect for human dignity and justice, Beneficence refers to the ethical obligation to maximize the benefits and to minimize harms. The principle of beneficence includes freedom from harm, freedom from exploitation, and benefits from research. Respect for human dignity, respect for persons involved, participants' right to self-determination. That is, the participant has the right to choose whether to participate in the study or not to participate in the research. Right to full disclosure. So participant has the right to know everything about what is done in the research because he is a participant, he or she is a participant. Then another principle is justice, includes right to fair treatment, right to privacy, anonymity, confidentiality. So here informed consent procedures are very important. Based on the whether it is an adult or child, the assent or the consent or assent has to be taken. Then finalizing and reviewing the research plan. This is to ensure that the plan will work smoothly. For example, if questionnaires are used, pre-testing the questionnaire, it is important to know whether the participants or the respondents understand the questions or whether a question has to be replaced or modification has to be made in the question. Also, the research plan has to be submitted. The research proposal has to be presented in front of experts or organization or get approved from the university. So it can be critiqued by peers or experts. This is phase 2, design and planning phase. Then comes the phase 3, it's the empirical phase. So the actual intervention or actual doing, empirical phase. So here comes the collection of data, collecting the data and preparing the data for analysis. So data collection already described briefly. So data has to be collected and the data has to be prepared for analysis. Data needs editing, coding and transformation. So prepare the data for the analysis. The next phase is phase 4, analytical phase. Here, analyzing the data and interpreting the results. Analysis of the data and interpretation of the results. The data gathered in the empirical phase is subjected to analysis and interpretation. Analysis of data plays an important role in the achievement of research objectives, and also the appropriate statistical techniques are used to analyze the data and test the so that the hypothesis can be tested. So after extensive editing and coding of the data gathered in the empirical phase is analyzed. Quantitative information is analyzed through statistical procedures. Various statistical methods are used to analyze data based on the nature of the data. Then phase 5, that is the dissemination phase. The analytical phase provides answers to the questions posed in the first phase of the research. So after analyzing the data has to be interpreting the results. That is making sense of the results and examining their implication. After this, in the dissemination phase, already answer is obtained for the question posed by the researcher. Now, the researcher's responsibility. Researcher has great responsibility in disseminating the result. Researcher's responsibility ends only with the dissemination of results. Here comes the communicating the findings and utilizing the findings in practice. So final task of the research project is preparation of research report that can be shared with others. So research report has to be prepared. It can be in various forms like term papers, dissertations. If it is done for post-graduation purpose or PhD or postdoctoral purpose, dissertation has to be made. Journal articles, presentations, and professional conferences. After that, the researcher has to find ways or a method or has to utilize the findings in practice. So, the researcher has to make a plan for its utilization in practice settings. These are the different phases of research process and different steps involved in research process. Quantitative research involves a fairly linear progression of tasks, but in qualitative research, the progression is closer to a circle than to a straight line. Qualitative researchers have a flexible approach to the collection and analysis of data, but quantitative researchers usually strictly follow these steps. Already these are predetermined steps and it's a logical progressive linear progression of steps and that will be adopted. That's all regarding research process. Thank you. Inviting your comments and suggestions. Thank you all.